How are you guys all doing? Welcome into the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiaga, live today on April 19th to wrap up the week, to kickstart your weekend with some more NFL conversations and topics on today's episode. We're going to start it off with more on Bill Belichick, carrying on from what we discussed yesterday to end yesterday's show, now carrying into Bill Belichick and discussing three teams that have been reported as his possible favorite places to coach in 2025 if those jobs become available and if he gets the opportunity to do that. Also, later on in the show, Tom Brady mentioned last time on the Deep Cut podcast when we had that conversation, he was asked about which quarterback he thinks could be the next quarterback to win his first Super Bowl. I saw that. I'm going to react to it, and I'm also going to give my top 5 list of who I believe will be the next quarterbacks most likely to win their next Super Bowl. And then to end the show, we're going to talk about the Washington Commanders, a bit of an unorthodox method to their top 30 visit, bringing in a lot of prospects at the same time, a lot of top quarterbacks at the same time. I'm going to go deeper into that and what it means and what their general manager, Adam Peters, said yesterday on where their feelings at around the number 2 pick. A lot of stuff to discuss on today's episode, so remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show. Before I jump into the first segment, I want to remind you guys, if you have any questions or comments, use the tip and donations link you see on your screen, GSMCPodcast.net. Using that link makes it easy for me to see your question pop up in the chat box. I can read it on air, and we can carry the conversation on that way, maybe take it in a different direction, make it more engaging, more conversational. It's a big help for the show as well as all the other shows. So again, if you would, please use the tip and donations link, GSMCPodcast.net, with any of your questions or comments. We always thank you guys greatly anytime you're able to do that. But like I mentioned, jumping into the first segment, more on Bill Belichick, talking first about the 3 teams that have been reported to be his preferred landing spots in 2025. After everything around Robert Kraft and not getting the Falcons job and just all these teams that some of them are mentioned on this list I have now, why they didn't decide to go through with Bill Belichick, his character, the demeanor, the intimidation that he brings. It doesn't sit well with a lot of managers. It doesn't sit well around the league. Most recently, just because of the recent years with the Patriots. Of course, he's won all those championships, all those Super Bowls. But more recently, he hasn't been great developing coaches under him. You see Matt Patricia, Josh McDaniels, Joe Judge not having the best of success elsewhere as their own head coaches. So that on top of the Mac Jones development, how he was put into a bad situation, not really prepared the right way, plus how the Patriots performed on the field and how their draft picks really also haven't worked out too well. All of that culminated recently doesn't favor Bill Belichick in many of the jobs, regardless, like I mentioned, of how many Super Bowls he has won. But that was yesterday, and I talked about it. My feelings still stay the same. I still think he probably should have gotten a job elsewhere. I think he's going to get a job sooner rather than later. There's always coaching changes, so I think he's going to be on a lot of people's top 2, top 3 list heading into 2025. And you also have reporters from ESPN like Don Van Netta Jr., Jeremy Fowler, Seth Wickersham, saying that the 3 top teams that are favored by Belichick are probably the most likely destinations are the Philadelphia Eagles, the Dallas Cowboys, and the New York Giants. Very fond of the NFC East, and like I mentioned yesterday, I talked about that the Eagles and the Cowboys were actually on that list that had a conversation with Bill Belichick, considered him for however amount of time, but they ended up deciding not to go with him for all the reasons that I mentioned, and now they're brought up again by very credible NFL insiders, and it is something to consider, starting with the Eagles, just because in that report, in that article posted by ESPN, and other sources as well that followed today and later in the afternoon yesterday. They said that Philadelphia's owner, Jeff Lurie, and their general manager, Howie Roseman, are both fans of Bill Belichick, but others within the organization were hesitant, had a lot of their doubts that I talked about yesterday about committing to firing Nick Sirianni, even if it didn't end well last year for the Eagles and for Sirianni and his coordinators. They were still hesitant because he is writing out his contract right now. He is closer to the end of his contract, so they figured they might as well, if they will move on from him eventually, to just write out his contract and bringing in Bill Belichick right at that moment, say this offseason, and they fired Nick Sirianni. Yeah, they would have a great roster. It would be perfect for Bill Belichick, which is why them or the Eagles are the top two candidates. But with the Eagles, it would be a good situation in the short term. You'd get instant gratification from the top offense that they have, a pretty solid defense. The NFC that doesn't really have one dominant team right now. You don't know how long, even with all those positives, that Bill Belichick will end up staying. How long are they willing to give him a contract? And you still have to consider all those factors that follow Bill Belichick. You know, how much can you trust him? That was brought up a lot yesterday when I mentioned Robert Kraft and what he allegedly said to Arthur Blank, the Falcons owner. How much can you trust him to commit to a game plan that everybody agrees with in comparison to what he truly believes? How much can you pull him away and get him to change from his go-to just methods on offense, on defense, really believing in his own just scheme and strategy? The league is changing. I think teams just have to evolve, and he hasn't really done that. How much can you get him to change in that short amount of time that he might be there? That was really the biggest question for the Eagles, but he is fortunate that at the top of the hierarchy in the Eagles, their owner, their general manager, they seem to be pretty fond of him right now. That is what the feeling is around the league. So it is something to monitor if the Eagles, say, don't have a bounce back season compared to what they did last year to end the year. If they start off rough and don't have a great record halfway through the year, I think you're going to start seeing more talk, more pressure on Nick Sirianni, and more people bringing up the name of Bill Belichick in connection to the Eagles. But that's where the Eagles stand on it, not completely shutting the door there to Bill Belichick. And then you have the next likely team, the Cowboys. Again, very favorable factors in this situation for Bill Belichick. They are on the last deal of the Mike McCarthy contract. They have a great roster. Regardless of all the stuff that we've talked about around the contracts and potentially losing one of your stars, they still have a very good roster overall outside of those players. So building on that is something they have to work on, but it's still a good-looking roster. And immediately when the news of Bill Belichick being available to coach and Mike McCarthy coming off of that very bad playoff loss to the Green Bay Packers, a lot of people thought that this would be it for Mike McCarthy. How could you keep him around? I certainly did. I thought that that was the last straw. Regardless if they won or lost, if they lost by 3 points, if they lost by 3 points, it wouldn't have mattered. I would have been all right with Mike McCarthy coming back, but it's the way that they lost at home, just really not putting up a fight, not looking prepared. I didn't see a way that he could come back, but right away, Jerry Jones announced the situation. They said they were going to stick with him, and that was that. So that came to a surprise to a lot of people, and it was reported that the thought of changing so quickly, especially to a guy, bringing in a guy like Bill Belichick who just carries that power, the aura around him, historical, legendary career, legacy that he carries, it might not have been ideal for him to just walk in. The power dynamic there with Jerry Jones could have gotten a little bit awkward. They could have clashed heads on a lot of things. And you think of Jerry Jones and that organization, seeing how that all works out. He likes to be in control of a lot of things. Bill Belichick also does, so that wouldn't have really worked out too well. But again, they're not really closing the door to it yet, and they seem open to it. It is favorable, but We'll see how that ends. And then the Giants are considerable, but you think of Bill Belichick, how long will he be a head coach if he comes back in 2025? After that, this Giants team is in a long-term project. They're not one or two, even three pieces away from really, really competing. It is a thought because, the nostalgia. He was there as an assistant, won 2 Super Bowl rings. There is that connection, but it's not really favorable or realistic at this point. If it wouldn't make sense for Bill Belichick to come in there and try and rebuild this team. It's not that much better than New England, so again, you're not really improving there. So those are the three favorable teams that he is looking at potentially in 2025, depending on how those situations develop. And just to round this segment off, I thought another thing that I saw on Bill Belichick, he appeared on the Pat McAfee show, and he touched on some interesting topics that they talked about. He is going to be on Pat McAfee's draft show, which is going to be awesome to see Bill Belichick interact with all those guys. And they also talked about the new kickoff rule, which I thought would have been great for Bill Belichick if he was a coach to try and scheme that, prepare his guys for that on special teams. But that's not the case, obviously. But he did have something to say on the new rule, which was there will be more of an emphasis on size players in the return game than speed. You just need guys who can play at the point of attack, shed blocks, and defend their space because of the new alignment. So I think it will increase the size of the players that are on the field. He said he loves the idea of players now that can block on special teams and cover on kickoffs. That is important once again, whereas last year it really became obsolete. All the kicks went out of the end zone. Everything was a touchback. He loves the idea of that coming back. The only thing he's not a fan of is the new onside kick rule, how you have to announce it. But regardless of that, I thought it was interesting because I never really thought of it that way. I don't think a lot of people really thought that this would mean you need bigger guys out there. It's always been about speed and getting the most agile guy back there who can cause the most missed blocks and shed the most tackles. Bill Belichick is thinking of it in a different way. I thought it was really interesting that he pointed out the size of the players now and how it all develops. I think I mentioned it before when I talked about it, how I was a big fan of the new kickoff rules, making it more important now. You've seen some players go out now and sign returners like the Ravens signing Deontay Hardy, the Pittsburgh Steelers bringing in Cordell Patterson from the Falcons, one of the best returners in NFL history. Teams are taking it seriously. Bill Belichick seems to also like it, and I think it's going that way. It's going to be a big thing to watch. It's going to affect a lot of games in 2024 and into 2025. I'm excited for it. I thought Bill Belichick made a good point there. I made sure to point it out because I didn't see many people talking about it, looking at the new kickoff rule that way, and it will make a big difference, and I'm excited, looking forward to seeing that in the new season. But I will leave that conversation there, and in the meantime, we'll keep going on with the show today. A lot more to come on today's episode. I mentioned the Commanders, my quarterback list of who could be the next to win their first Super Bowl. But after the break, we're going to talk about A.J. Brown and a potential interest from the New England Patriots. They were in the market for a new number one wide receiver. Could they be getting close, maybe inquiring a bit further than a lot of other teams about potentially trading for A.J. Brown? I'll tell you why those rumors started to come up from yesterday and now into today. Something to keep an eye out for. I'll tell you why. Don't go anywhere. We're just getting started here today on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.